and happy Friday. It is such a treat. We are here with In the Loop on a Friday. I know you're thinking we should be here Wednesday, so we appreciate you for tuning in. As a reminder, we are streaming on over a dozen different social media platforms, so what a treat. Now, we have a very special guest in just moments. And of course, Greg is going to kick it off with our special guest and some more news. But I'm here for business finance. But before we get too deep though, let's definitely welcome you to In the Loop and bring Greg, Friday. How fun is this?
It is. It is St. Patrick's Day on top of that. And I noticed you wore the green. I am wearing gray for some reason. I obviously should have worn green. But nonetheless, it is a good day to be here. And yeah, it's Friday, a different day than we're normally on, but we appreciate everybody joining in here with us as usual. Like Woody said, we're live on so many different platforms. So wherever you're watching, drop in your comments, let us know what you want to talk about, what you're doing today. We have some fun discussions to get to. So I don't want to take up too much time right now, but I'm just saying AI. We're talking about AI today, artificial intelligence and everything associated with it. And we have Ross, who's going to be giving us all the kinds of info that we need on this.
Is amazing.
Our expert that's going to be here. So I'm looking forward to that. So a lot of stuff to get to, but I know, Winnie, it's also, I know there's AI to talk about, but it has been a huge week for your world as well.
Absolutely. I'm going to move it pretty quick, Greg. But before I jump in, for those of you who don't know, Greg, total legendary tech reporter, and we want to give it up real quick. We got to do a shout out, Greg. I'm so excited and happy for you. Can you just maybe give us a real quick glimpse of what's happening this week?
Yeah, so I have actually signed on with KPTV, Fox 12 Oregon here in Portland as a reporter and producer to create some new streaming content that they're going to be, that we're all going to be creating. I guess I'm part of the team too. So we're going to be creating this stuff. It's a little bit further out, maybe a couple weeks, months, something like that. So, but I will be sure to let everybody know once we go live with it. It's really exciting, a fun opportunity, and really happy to be on board with them.
We are so excited for you, Greg, and we're going to definitely be watching and supporting you. But I know a lot of people are wondering, you can breathe. We still get to keep our Greg on In the Loop.
Yep. All that stuff stays. It's just some more things that I'm going to be doing on top of that. So
more Greg on more places. So that you definitely can check it out. Definitely follow him, Greg Limbler, on Twitter. He's been sharing that information. I've been sharing it. So we definitely want to keep you in the loop, of course. Now, for those of you who are new to the show, I'm Winnie Sun, longtime financial pro, CNBC council member, Forbes contributor, and of course, host of Level Up on NASDAQ and on some other stream platforms. We are so happy to have you here. We're going to kick it off like we normally do and talk about how the market is doing. Now, normally I tell you how the market closed because we usually run in the afternoon. But let's talk about what it's currently doing. The Dow is down, unfortunately. It's still down 300 points, a little bit more than 300 points. It improved just slightly before we started going live here, like around 290-ish. But yeah, it's down 300. S&P 500 is also down 33. But here's the big one that I'm almost paying attention to a lot, and that is NASDAQ. At NASDAQ, the tech-heavy NASDAQ is down 65 points currently, my friends. So if you're looking at your 401k, maybe, don't look it over this weekend. And just know these things will take some time to flush out. But that's what we're looking at. This has been a very tough week. If you've been following me this week or even following business news, you might actually think that there's something wrong because you can't refresh news because it seems like all day long, everyone, every place is talking about bank collapses. And so you may have heard of Silicon Valley Bank. You've probably heard of Signature as well. And of course, Credit Suisse, which is offshore as well. And the big news coming recently is also on First Republic Bank, which some of you may have seen that I talked about yesterday, right? These companies are getting crushed. But no doubt some of them aren't even trading on the exchange anymore. Investors are very, very nervous about these smaller banks, not that they're tiny or they're even small, just smaller versus the mega banks that you're used to, like the B of A's and the Chases and whatnot. So investors are very, very nervous, but also customers are nervous. And investors are also paying attention to what's going to happen next week on the Federal Reserve meeting on March 21st to 22nd. How much will interest rates rise to kind of help mitigate inflation? Is it going to be 0.25%, or is it going to be 0.5%? We don't know, but that's what we're watching. And I'll be sure to let you know next week. And why that's important is because we need to get interest rates up, because that has shown historically to help with the price of goods that you and I spend at the grocery store and for stuff in general for our families. So we want inflation to be at a more normal level too, hopefully closer to 2%. But I don't think we can hold our breath anytime soon. Not going to happen anytime soon. But here's what we do know so far. Okay. Today, big news, of course, on the Silicon Valley Bank. Now, there's talks of the Silicon Valley Bank is going to, I guess, Silicon Valley Financial looks like they're going to be moving into bankruptcy. That's right. Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection for the Southern District of New York. And so they're saying that there's about $12 billion, before shares, which really dropped last week as depositors ran to the bank, doing that sort of bank run. So this really caused a whole bunch of problems. So this Chapter 11 process is going to allow the company to sort of preserve some of its value and make some changes, and hopefully for the better, because I know a lot of people in Northern California and the Silicon Valley area, tech startups, life science startups, they really rely on this type of more unique type of business and banking. That Silicon Valley Bank has been a company that a lot of those types of companies have depended on in that space. So that's one thing, right? And of course, Credit Suisse's saga continues. It's ongoing market confidence issues. Certainly, a lot of people still continue to be worried, even though the Swiss bank did get some money, some liquidity injected that kind of kept it alive for now. There's even talk that it could be taken over by another Swiss lender, UBS, but we'll see if that happens. And of course, yesterday's big news is First Republic Bank, which, based in San Francisco, needed to be bailed out, essentially. A $30 billion rescue of First Republic Bank by, JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon, as along with many others. We know that, um, many people are working that. In fact, I think 11 banks actually stepped up and helped made a contribution into the bank at First Republic, providing, some banks providing as much as 5 billion in uninsured deposits just to make sure that the bank stayed afloat. And if you think that this is the end of this bank saga, well, then you probably think that Elon Musk has turned really, really nice overnight. Not going to happen. Still a lot of things are going to be flushing out. So I think this is one of those situations where I would sit back and watch and wait a little bit. I wouldn't get too aggressive, but especially this weekend, take a look, review your bank accounts, make sure you're not overly concentrated in one area. And remember that FDIC insurance covers up to 250,000 in one bank account per title. So pay attention to that, right, Greg? I mean, like, Greg has been crazy in the financial. I've been so busy. I think I've done like 8 interviews this week on television shows and interviews. It's been nuts.
I can only imagine. Yeah, for you. I mean, I was following along with some of it. There's so much that's happening. I definitely followed along with the Silicon Valley Bank and just like the craziness behind that. There's a podcast I listened to that kind of explained it out for me. But yeah, it's wild out there. I mean, you have your work cut out for you just even reporting on all of this. I imagine your phone's going off the hook all the time.
Yeah, but it's been really, really fun. I mean, I want to thank, I've been on it's been very, very fun. But, before we got to say hello and welcome to, of course, Sadiq is here on YouTube Live. By the way, Greg, Sadiq says congratulations. And Joshua is also saying congratulations. So thanks you so
guys.
much. Everybody's supporting. We're so excited, Greg. You're like our family. So when something good happens, we want to celebrate that. But I'm going to be quiet because I want to hear from you and Ross. Because for those of you who don't know, Ross Quintana is like amazing, and he and I are on Adobe Insiders together, and it was such a treat to have him with us today.
Well, maybe we should just bring Ross right on here, because I've got this first story to talk about that I bet he would be a perfect addition to bring in. Ladies and gentlemen, Ross Quintana. Hi, Ross.
Yay!
Hey, what's up, everybody? Glad to be here.
Ross, for everybody who's watching too and tuning in and getting to see you, they may already know who you are. I'm sure you've got to have a huge audience that's already with us. But can you kind of explain a little bit about your background and how what it is that you do? Is just so many amazing things.
Yeah, well, that's a very tricky question because I do a lot of things. Yeah, my main business is social magnets, and we do social media management, marketing, content design. We do all of that, and then we also have consulting business that we do, and I'm head of social for Adobe Partners as well. And so I have a very full plate, and I'm also a futurist, and so I was early adopting Gen Z and or Gen Z. Yes, I look so young. Look at me, Gen Z, Gen Xer. I mean, um, going back in time.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah. I mean, you never know. It's just I adopt very well. Anyway, yeah. So we really focus on marketing strategy and helping people. We do personal branding, executive comms. There's a lot of things that we have our hands in a lot of different things. But yeah, our main thing is social media strategy and management and content design.
Which is, like you said, you've got a full plate there. That's a lot of things that you just touched on. But one thing that I think is going to touch on all of those aspects is AI in some way, shape, or form. I mean, it's, we've been talking about it here on The Loop, just how much AI is really, especially it seems like over these last few months, I know it's been years, but over the last few months, now it's like everyone's aware of it and starting to see the different ways that it's influencing things, or at least being aware that, okay, they're, companies are working on this or this. You just had the big announcements from Microsoft and Google, but Microsoft even yesterday talking about how they're going to start incorporating more AI into Office 365. So some of those things that you're used to using, Word or PowerPoint, all of that, you're going to start seeing some more influx of AI in there. And that's all part of that partnership with OpenAI. So there's like some good examples actually they put out in this video. So it's called Copilot. And basically you can give it kind of like if you've experimented with any of the Bing chatbot or Chat GPT, you give it kind of some ideas and then it will come up with something. So there's, draft up a product announcement. And then boom, it makes a product announcement. Some key things too to take away though that have been kind of some criticisms of this is that the AI isn't always 100% correct. So you do have to double check it and you have to make sure that everything's right. But in theory, this could speed up some workflows and processes. And, Ross and Winnie, I'm curious, your thoughts on this. Is this something that you would incorporate in and use?
I'll let Ross go first. He's the expert.
Yeah. Along with and going on with this, there's so many ways it's going to be integrated. We went from it going from a buzzword, right, to actual adoption. And as somebody who, watches every hype cycle, and then I'm always the voice of reason that comes in and says, okay, but it still has to go through the adoption arc. And so as much as people were, every time they talk about, oh, it's going to be AR and the world's going to be changing. Oh, then it's VR and then it's AI. They've been talking about that, but there's usually a long arc before you get to actual adoption. And that's what's different with AI. Salesforce also announced their kind of Einstein GPT. So we're seeing along with the Microsoft and all of that, each of these things are all of a sudden going to go from something that you kind of hear in the background away, like, okay, now everybody, even normal people, your friends are talking about how they're using AI like it's insane, going from 0 to 60 to that, to where it's like, it's not just business people using it. It's really getting into all of the feeds and everybody's finding new ways to do it. And that's one of the things where I think it's what I call the AI adoption fold, which is if you can imagine this adoption curve and then kind of normally it's linear and it's like, okay, cool. You have the hype cycle and then you have, the early adopters and then a few kind of use cases, but it's not mainstream. And then way down the road, you get into the middle of the curve and people starting to actually use it. And then even then, it's not really being used in all the ways. The creative uses of it don't come for way longer. And what we have here is we have that adoption, that linear thing folding on itself. And I did this article for CMS Wire about search and AI. And one of the interesting things is we instantly went from finding destinations of information, right, to actually getting the context of the information. Whereas before you'd go and you'd get 10 sites and you could look at 5 and you could pick the information you wanted and needed. And that was all on you. And now with things like generative AI, like ChatGPT, it's going to go, not just tell you the information, it's going to look through all that information, come back, and it's going to digest it for you, put it together, and even in some cases execute what you're trying to do with the information, let alone give you context for the information. So it's a huge jump forward on the adoption and use cycle, and that's what we're having with AI. People talk about AI being something that's growing so fast, which it is. I mean, NVIDIA said they predicted its AI was going to be 1 million times more powerful than ChatGPT in just 10 years. 1
Wow.
million times. That's not just 1 million. 1 million times. Like, that's a hard number to even fathom. And
Yeah.
this is what's happening is that the use cases are showing up right at the entry level where the technology is there. We just never see that. It takes a long time to see a lot of use cases.
Yeah, and a lot of that, like you said, like this is coming so publicly, so quick that everybody's using it. A lot of times, all that stuff is done in the background with companies doing that stuff before the public's even aware of everything that's happening. And now it's just everyone's in it. A good example, yesterday, there was a press release sent out by the city of Tigard, which is like a suburb of Portland. Their Parks and Rec department now uses ChatGPT to generate and send out their press releases, which is just kind of bizarre and weird in its own right, but still it's everywhere right now. And, talking about that and about how it's being incorporated into so many different products, I think looking at, part of what you do, because you do so many different things, but talking about, the influencer side and social media, how do you see AI affecting that? Like, is this something where this may be a little bit out there, maybe not, but do we get down the line to where, AI is going to be the best social media influencer, where it's some fake person created? I know that there's some of that out there right now.
It's already out there. And here's the thing, being in that in the influencer world and then the content design kind of content creator world, there's a whole bunch of people that rush in. When you watch this stuff from behind the scenes, you kind of see how people integrate it and what they're doing. And it's cool because some people really, come from left field with stuff, but a lot of times the early stuff is like really basic stuff. It's like, hey, it's like SEO. People want, GPT to write a blog post for them and do all this. And it's like, that's not the greatest, highest use of it. Like, there's so many other ways that it's going to be integrated. I think with influencers, it even beyond influencers, it's about attention. How's it going to affect the feed? How's it going to affect the content that's created? Because there's the one side that says, okay, it's going to enable creators to do things they hadn't done before. But a lot of times that actually requires the understanding and creativity to know how to use that. We don't usually get that until way later. Think about something like Instagram, where, it started with just, here, you can load a picture and you have a couple filters. And I've always said that the limitations create creativity, because when you can't do anything like Twitter, when it was just 140 characters and people were doing summarizing whole books in one tweet, and like that was really creative. And usually that's at the beginning of a good platform or a new technology. It's basic for a reason, because it hasn't developed in third and fourth generations. And so what happens is it's kind of like quickly the audience gets to a point where they're going, okay, we've pressed every button, but now let's start thinking of different ways that no one's done it. And that's the fun side, both for the creator and for the audience. And what we see with ChatGPT is it's going to go into this very advanced creator community. But in the beginning, a lot of those uses are going to be, it's not as intuitive as you'd think. Like the first experience people have with ChatGPT, you think you're going to go in there and type in a thing, and it's going to wow you, and it's going to start being Terminator 2 and telling you about how it's taking over. It just isn't quite that way. Like, I tried to write a thought leadership post with it, knowing that I could give it the direction and the commands to kind of put something out. After about an hour or so, I was like, okay, well, it can't replace me anytime soon writing thought leadership, because conceptually it doesn't do great, even though it's powered by machine learning, as far as seeing what's not seen and making those connections and getting more the insight of the connections. It can kind of make the connections, and it can pull from a lot of data sources, but the insight isn't quite there yet. And so we'll see how it plays in the influencer space. I think that it's going to take a hot minute. We're seeing totally random stuff being generated with it right now. But I think that, you know, it still needs a little bit of time before people are really pushing it out.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to hear, because I just saw the comment there from Sadiq, you know, just entering in Greg Nibbler, Winnie Sun the loop, and then having YouTube create a GPT generated episode. Yeah. Without us. I don't know. That's something I always worry about.
It's not going to replace creators anytime soon. It's just not, you know, in that sense, it's not good enough, but it still needs to be coached. And so that interface, it's going to take every creator time to figure out, how do I get it to do something that's not really Wikipedia style, you know, because if you have a brand, you know, you've got markers there that are very specific. And when you go into there, it's not like you're going to type it in and it's going to be you all of a sudden. So it definitely has a learning curve.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So maybe we're a little ways out from that, although, you know, you can see we're maybe down the line that could get to that point. Looking at AI too, you know, and for everybody tuning in, if you have suggestions or ways that you're utilizing artificial intelligence right now, you know, I would love to hear, you know, what it is, because I feel like every day you see some other announcement from some company or someone doing something with it. I mean, even just a month ago, it was just creating, you know, using AI to create the images and the portraits, which I did, which were hilarious, but then everybody did them. So you have like that kind of use case for maybe you could find some kind of like artistic use there. But looking at it, I guess going forward, maybe I should ask the two of you, Winnie and Ross, do either of you use AI or Chat GPT or any of those kinds of functions right now for anything that you do?
I absolutely do. I do Chat GPT almost on a daily basis, Greg. For so much of what I do, I think it definitely saves me time. As you know, Ross eloquently said, it can't replace us, thank goodness yet. I think that it will come to a point where, you know, it will challenge us to be even more creative and more thoughtful in the way that we use it. This is again a tool in our sort of influencer, you know, content creating box. But that being said, we need to know how to manipulate and work with it. It's not going to go anywhere. It's only going to get stronger. But I think it's going to challenge us to be more creative. Lori, who was on our tweet chat with Ross and I last week, or actually maybe was it this week, or I don't know. I think it was last week. We were talking about AI, and she made a great point that I love. She says, you know, imagine if a lot of the mundane things were taken over by AI, and we really just had to focus on being more creative and being more human. Imagine how much more we could do and the next generation could do. So I think that's true, because, you know, a lot of the things that take a lot of time have now, I mean, it used to take me like hours to write a script, you know, for a show. Now it takes me 15 minutes, right? But it doesn't, the writing part is so much faster, but it doesn't take away from the fact that I'm still doing a lot of research. I have to read it. I have to be comfortable talking about it, but it just helps do the simple things really, really well. I think that's going to change. I can see in 6 months from now how much more advances would be. So I think that for those who are watching, if you feel like you're worried that AI, you know, could eat your cake, I think it's going to eat a lot of your cake. So it's a matter of, how do we become more human? How do we, you know, focus and get more nimble and really focusing on the ways that we can't be replaced, which I think the three of us on this show would agree, right, Greg? You've definitely, like, everybody trusts you because they know you know tech, but you can make it something that we can understand. Ross definitely explains things in many ways. And not only that, he looks at in the future and kind of is saying, hey, these are the things you should be paying attention to. And if you're a business and you're not doing this, you really should.
Yeah.
There's still a place for us, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. The nail gun didn't replace the framer. It's a tool. It helps, advances, you know, the construction of things, but that's how AI is. And, you know, here's the crazy thing is, there's a great documentary. I think Nat Geo did it a while back, called Guns, Germs, and Steel. And it was a study on how societies advance. And what I loved about it and what I got out of it is that the crazy thing is that depending on the type of food they had and the animals they had to cultivate that food, the places in different latitudes actually didn't advance, because you're like, well, how can we have people still, you know, in the jungle and very primitive living, and you have people designing, you know, neural networks and stuff like that, and we're all here at the same time. And the point is the big aha was that people who were freed up, once you had wheat and you could have 2 years of food stored up, you were freed to not think about food. And it's that reallocation of your mental resources that allowed you to develop the next thing. And then that helped you in society. And then you develop the next thing and the next thing. What I find is that free time, it isn't the destroyer of people, right? What it does is it allows you the freedom to innovate in the next way, to position yourself to adapt in the next phase of the world. And so I don't think that, I'm not a doom and gloom on the AI in the sense of like, I don't think it's just going to wipe everybody out and there's no more use for us. I disagree. Even the freedom that it brings you, like you were saying, that extra, when you save that extra 15 minutes, you get to reallocate that 15 minutes into doing more Winnie. And that is where you're going to advance, because if you're busy with that, you can't be over there growing to the next level. And I think that's the way people should kind of look at it and say, how can I help this take those tasks? How can I take a 10-minute task, turn it to a 2-minute task? How can I do that so that I can go on and build the next thing that's going to be good for me?
That's why I still want my household robot that's going to do my laundry for me. And,
yeah. I thought it was kids. Turns out it isn't. They have other neat interests once they get old enough to do the laundry. It's weird.
But I think that's such a great point that you just made there. So that free time is where humans are going to, have that space back to kind of innovate and go from there. Taking a look here in at the comments coming through. So Kanish, thank you, Winnie. AI saves a lot of time. Yeah. Yeah. I think that is a real positive way to look at it. And that's why, even going back to what Microsoft, is doing with this, and they're not the only company, working to incorporate AI. Obviously, we know that Google's doing a bunch as well. Right now, I believe Gmail is going to start having some AI incorporated, and everything's going to have AI. But some of the things they were showing, with this Copilot actually do seem like they'd be great time savers, especially if you're someone who's doing, say, a whole lot of PowerPoint presentations, which those can be tedious, to put together. But if you can just put in, what your topics are, and then boom, it generates it out for you, loads it with graphics, loads it with everything. That I could imagine would be a tremendous time saver for someone to not have to do that side of things. So, thinking about that and just thinking about, where you could utilize it, now it's in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, when he's using it to write her scripts, that's actually a really good idea. That can save a whole bunch of time, maybe SEO, like you were talking about, Ross, as well. But thinking about different ways that can be incorporated in, I think is pretty fascinating. Ross, from the futurist standpoint, I know we just kind of got into that a little bit there, but, freeing up time, how do you have any insight into that or thoughts on AI? Like, say, you mentioned 10 years from now or whatever, it's going to be a million times. What about like a year from now? How do you think it's going to be influencing all of us?
Yeah, that's what's funny is guy I work with, Eamon French, he works at Social Magnets with me as a content designer. We were talking about this during the chat, and he's like, well, 5 years. And it was so funny because I was instantly thinking that the 5 year, that's how we used to kind of think of technology. Oh, this
right.
In 5 years, because, and that cycle, that adoption cycle is getting shorter and shorter. And so I'm like, I don't even think I can talk about it in 5 years, because I think there's actually too many emanations of it that you couldn't fully grasp. This is the problem we have with AI right now. Right now, AI is seeping into so many places simultaneously, and not as like a little novelty, but as a full-on integration in so many different ways that people are just grabbing it and using it for different things, that it's too much to comprehend. And that's that's one of the issues with AI overall, is that there's no attribution model to say, hey, how'd you get this answer? Show me the sources, right, and all of the, you pulled from a million pieces of data. Can you map that out for? We couldn't digest that. So at a certain point, you have to let go and go, well, I guess it just got me the answer. I guess I can't ask any questions about where all that came from, so that I can say, oh, don't include that reference. That wasn't a good source, because it's the generative AI is pulling from just everything and giving you a collage of what it believes. And it doesn't know when it's wrong.
Right.
That's a big problem.
That is such a huge problem. I mean, even go back to that announcement, they're saying like, okay, well, yeah, it's going to be wrong sometimes, but like, where is it wrong? And that means that I have to identify what's wrong. You even think back about I think it was Microsoft too, that had the Twitter account that they wanted it trained on tweets, and then it turned into a Nazi within like an hour. I mean, so it's like, how is all that working, behind the scenes? And I guess, yeah, you just accept it and be like, okay, well, it's right. Yeah, that's going to be, I think, an interesting thing to shake out and just figure out how is this being, not regulated necessarily, but how is it being tracked? How are we knowing exactly what's going on? Like, where are the stop gaps in there?
Yeah, it's alien artifact, and people are just touching it, and shooting lightning bolts, and we're like, hey, it doesn't even know what this does, and it's like, no, should we eat it? What should we do with it? And it's like, no, you got to be careful. And that's going back to your question about a year from now. The problem is what we can do is we can look in certain instances and say, here's where I think the arc's going to go in this industry and with this thing. But it's moving so fast, it's like the Spawn suit, going over the top of the person. Its tentacles are going in so many different directions that it's hard to understand the ecosystem, because then you get, besides the technology growing, then the use cases and the creativity then off that point to the next jump point, and someone did it with this, now I'm going to do it something like that over here, but even more advanced. It's moving so fast that I think we're going to run into an issue where we don't really know what it's going to look like in a year. We don't know what it looks like right now. Like, nobody can map out and tell us, here's what AI looks like, the AI landscape. It's not like something like mobile where you're going, here's how much adoption there is, and here's how many, devices are out there, and blah. That's easy. You can measure it. It's like the old thing, you can't manage it if you don't measure it. Well, we can't quite measure what's inside the black box with AI. Even individually, the companies in their individual instances don't fully understand it. And so we're just keep making it like, hey, let's just keep going.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Maybe you shouldn't push all the buttons, the shiny buttons that are on there.
Yeah, exactly. We're like, we want so bad to make it like it's human. And it's like, I always think that, and I'm like, I don't want.
Why? Yeah.
I don't want my microphone to have a mind of its own and decide is it upset at me? It doesn't want, it wants to mess up. It wants to screech. The speakers decide that they want to blow my ears out to see how high they can go. Like, I don't want my technology having a mind of its own. That's typically called a malfunction, right? If all of a sudden, hey, my computer, I got the blue screen of death. What happened? I don't know. It acted erratic. And then you're spending half the day trying to figure out why. Like, that's not the model we want to be applying to maybe one of the most powerful technologies that we've seen in our lifetime. I just think that's a little bit irresponsible. And so, sooner or later, we're going to have to, it's kind of like even with the jobs, right? When you look at the jobs in AI, there's no way they're going to be able to catch up to the technology. So you're not going to have people advanced enough to get out in front of it to take a look at it and say, wait, what is this? How is this working? Because by the time they get their education, it's going to be iterated so fast and obsolete, so much further on that it's going to be hard to keep up with it.
And Ross, I think that's a great point. I think it's something that we need to harness, and we need to figure out how to, we need to babysit. And I think even using tools today, like, I think there's so much, I kind of equate it to, I remember back in the day when people were just starting off on social media and they would have interns or such posts on their behalf, right? I tested that out one day. And I remember one of my interns posted something about potato chips. I'm like, why are you posting about potato chips? And she's like, everybody loves potato chips. I'm like, but that's not like my brand.
I love this story.
Same thing with AI, right? But I want to sort of bring in some of the comments that we've been having on the show, which I think are really good. Kanishik is talking about how can we ensure that AI technology is inclusive and accessible to all, regardless of background or social set. I think this is a great question, but I do love the fact that it does sort of create an even playing ground, right? Like, I think this is a tool that more people will have access to, so have more information, but then so it'll be in terms of controlling this information too. And then Chef MDT second is saying, as long as AI isn't voting for me, I'll give it a chance. And I think it's one of those things, like, I remember when the internet first came about, there were a lot of, or even texting. I remember there were people like, oh no, I'm not going to text. I'm just going to use a phone and call people. Why would you text, right? And like, why would you use the internet? We can go to the library and use the decimal system. Like, no. But yeah, I think we can't shy away from this. So here we also see another President Ross is obviously making a very valid point. Well, I appreciate the intellectual capabilities of AI. limited in aspect, right? And right, definitely not equipped yet on emotional intelligence. Do you think
No.
it will, Greg, one day?
I don't know. I was thinking about Ross's point on that too. I'm like, so what somebody's gonna have to say, like, I'm sorry I couldn't finish the project today. My computer and I got into a fight this morning, and we're not we're not talking. Yeah, we're not talking right now. I don't know. I'll try to work it out.
Like a cat, it's emotionally punishing me by giving me the wrong results so that my job becomes in jeopardy.
It deleted my media file because it was really ticked off. I don't know what to do. Yeah.
So that's a good point. I don't know how. So I've been messing around with ChatGPT, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you ask them to do the same function 3 different times, it will give you 3 different results, which is really weird. So sometimes, like, I'll say, like, create bullet points for me on this thing that I'm studying, right? And then I'll create this, and then I'll come back and I'm like, okay, use the same function, create bullet points for this, and then it's all different. And like, what is going on? I thought this was a computer. Isn't it supposed to give us like some sort of consistency?
That's a big problem, because I when you create personas, like some people, you can create a persona and I'll put in a list of hashtags. I'll tell it, give me, 2 of the hashtags from this randomly that apply to it or whatever, right? And I'll have it a format. I want a double space after this where you put the hashtags. So if I'm using it to create content, once you get 3 or 4 batches in, that's the great thing about a computer is, hey, it's rules. But somehow all of a sudden, where'd my double space go? Hey, I told you to add a statistic in there, and now my new set doesn't have a statistic. And it's like like a little kid, where you're like, no, you're supposed to be picking up your room, and you start watching your tablet, and it's like, that to me is weird, because logically it doesn't make sense. It makes me question, like, are you remembering this? Like, our chat, is it becoming a sub data set, and we come back to it and you remember all the rules? But it isn't, because half the time I got to come back and then it's like, oh, what's that hashtag list? And I give it a reference name and I'm like, oh, now I have to reload it again. So I'm not quite sure, what's going on behind the scenes there. But it is a problem. It's not quite consistent. And one more thing is to point back to about the diversity and inclusion and all of that before we, go past that comment. The problem is to answer that is, yes, more people have access to AI, but the problem is AI is a reflection of the data set. And so when we think that it's going to be this utopia and it's going to, not see color and race and all that, it's built on all of the embedded social cues that are in all of the data that it has. So it's going to not only reflect society. I mean, I don't think it'll be better. It'll actually be worse, because it's like almost reflecting what's out there in society with less awareness and social skills to understand when it's off. So again, it's going to be taking everything in. And I don't know that it's evaluating, hey, maybe I shouldn't include this in my data set. Oh, this is kind of excluding these people. And the way it's not doing that. And when they try and go in and train it, the problem is it has the opposite effect, is they say, okay, don't, have anything about that. And then it inadvertently, eliminates entire groups of people. So I've read some different things on this, and it's a bigger problem than it's not an easy solution, because it's like saying, why can't we all just get along in the world? And it's like, well, as much as we want that to be true, it's not going to be. There's violence and there's conflict, and you put enough people together, you're going to get that. You know what I mean? So it's like, what can we do instead to mitigate where we can, where it makes sense, and what's smart to do that? And I think we can do some of that, but it's just not going to be like, hey, great, we just put in a few rules and say, don't be racist, and now it's not racist. Right. Sadly, it's just not going to be like that. As a matter of fact, there's actually a lot of problems, because it is the driver who runs you over, who doesn't even notice you were there. That's the problem with AI, is it doesn't know when it's doing something wrong.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you think back to even with facial recognition technology, and all the issues there, specifically a few years ago when it was really, really big, because it's trained on, a certain kind of people that they were training it on, and then things just don't work out that way. So, and that's the technology on, like you said, what it's based on, what it's learning from. And I think that's going to be huge. I don't know what that comment was that just came through right there, but
Carlos's comment from LinkedIn. Thank you, Carlos, for jumping in.
We'll incorporate AI that can capture details from video and automatically post social media clips and images when it recognizes some preset parameters instantly, all real time. Wow. That's pretty cool. So it's just going to automatically cut out social clips.
Thank you, Carlos, for sharing.
Yeah, that's a fascinating use case of it right there. That I'd love to learn more about that. Because I think that's pretty cool to be able to have something that could just automatically do that. Because that's such a huge part of any kind of video production now, is getting your social media clips out there.
We're all video people, and I'll tell you what, that's the high barrier, right? Is like, we do content design, so it's like we're always editing video, doing all this and that, and people don't do video. That's a great example of the hype cycle. Everybody's like, a couple of years back, Winnie, like if you remember, we're always put in those like, oh, what's these little influencer, like, think tank type things, right? And everyone's like gets hyped behind a certain technology and like video, and it was live streaming, and then it was video, and it's all these things. But then the adoption curve rules the day, right? And says, wait a minute, you better, do you want to spend 6 hours editing video? No,
right.
You don't? Okay, well, I guess you're not going to be video. And so that's where these tools like this that can take those barriers and overcome them. That's a perfect example of what we were talking about earlier, which is take the pain points, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Google tried to do this quite a while back. It's funny. Sometimes Google always, in my opinion, they always quit too early. They innovate too early, and then they quit what they innovated because the market wasn't quite ready. And then the market's ready, but they've already moved past it. It's like Google Glass and all that. It's like, so here's the thing is I feel like, finding those barriers. They used to have a thing where they were on your phone where it was like, hey, you use all this stuff, would you like me to just make this a button for you? And I was like, this is what I want. As a growth hacker, I'm like, one less click is gold for me. Like, I don't want to do things in 3 menus. Give it to me. Give me the things I do all the time right up front, because I'm not ever doing the other things, rearrange that. And I think that's a good use that now they're revisiting. You're seeing some of that. And I think we're going to see that in that Office integration with AI. I think you're going to see a lot of those multi drop down here, going to do this. And then it's going to be watching what you're doing. Sounds creepy. But then it's going to say, hey, you're moving this information 3 different ways and going all this. Would you like me to just give you a button to do the same thing over and over? Or do you want me to just do it for you on the rest of these 6 examples? Like, that's the technology I think everybody's hoping for and waiting for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and doing the dishes and folding the laundry.
Yeah.
Like
yes.
All of those things.
I need that.
Free up my time. That is great. Well, I mean, this has been just a fascinating discussion, just talking about all this too, and just where it's all going. Ross, I think for everybody's watching too, and just your idea, do you have any recommendations, I guess, for people at home who haven't experimented around with it or haven't tried it out? Like, what should they do to maybe get their mind around it a little bit better, or actually get their hands on it in a sense, to try out AI just to get an understanding of it?
Yeah, I think to Winnie's comment earlier about texting, I remember I was kind of a later adopter on texting. I was like, you could just send an email. I could make a call. Like, everyone's jazzed out about sending 10,000 texts, and look at the bills are going so high. All the news was like crazy. And it's one of those things that the minute you try it, the minute you're at the store and you're just like, oh, do we need macaroni? And it's like, oh, you're like, you get it. And that's how AI is. So the thing I would suggest for people is probably go check out, like, ChatGPT is really low hanging fruit. I think what's amazing about ChatGPT is that when you go in and you just start messing around, within 5 minutes, you're going to understand how it's different than going to Google. Like, it is not an easy way to describe it. You just get it. And so that's what I would suggest, is that people just go try it out and go ask it some questions and talk with it. I mean, the whole technology when chatbots were it's going to be chatbots, and Gartner and all these predictions of like how it's going to integrate, and then it was like chatbots came out and they were so terrible and they didn't answer right, and it's like after the 9th time you're like, okay, I'm never talking to this thing again. Then you totally evolve and zoom forward with like ChatGPT, and it's a whole different experience, and you understand, okay, I can like you instantly get how that's going to start to affect and change people and things that you could do with it. And so you just got to get in there and start talking to it. It's conversational interface. And so that's a little different. You're not saying, hey, giving a basic Google command. I think people, it's like, I asked it at one point, do you like to be considered a tool, or do you want me to talk to you as a person? And it's like, I'm a tool. And, it's conversational interface. And And that is, I think, part of the interesting part about it. So I'd say go try out Open. I believe it's
OpenAI.
OpenAI.com, I believe it is.
Yeah, I would recommend that too. That's a great recommendation for everybody at home. You know, if you haven't tried it out, just go do it. I mean, it's free to try, so you can go in there, just get more of an idea of really what's going on. But yeah, this has been fantastic. You know, Ross, thank you so much for being here with us today too.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Absolutely. I love the conversation. Of course, you know, Winnie, have been friends for a long time, so it's great to come to the show. And you know, AI is one of those things where, yes, for the first couple seconds, I was like, oh, another hype cycle. All I saw in the feed, I was like, oh, please. I almost didn't really deep dive into it because it was almost obnoxiously everywhere in the feed. But then do yourself a favor. Yes, it can be obnoxious to see the 200th post about ChatGPT. You know, but go in there, try it out, because, you know, it's gonna evolve, and it's gonna be part of so many different areas of everyone's lives that I think that, you know, you want to just get in and experience it for yourself.
Awesome.
100%. Thank you, Ross. This is incredible. I learned so much, and I mean, I think there's so much potential with this tool, Greg. I'm so glad that Ross could spend some time and kind of teach us and explain some of this too. I know it's definitely the buzzword. I think there's a lot more for us to talk about on this subject, Greg, in the next few months, next few years. It'll be exciting to kind of witness this all together.
Yeah. Who knows? We talk about this in 2 months, it could be completely different. Something brand new could be out by that time.
And one thing I would say is, one of the best things that people can do too is, one way or another, it's going to impact your life. And so just don't ignore it in that sense, because just having conversations like this, even when there's like 10,000 things we could have talked about AI, and maybe we only talked about 15, the fact is that just having it top of mind and getting that, opening up your awareness to different things, and where, like, that's the best thing, I think, because we were talking about the technology kind of being a runaway technology. So for that reason right there, the best thing that everyone can do is just keep looking at it, keep thinking about it, because that's going to ease that gap from it being everywhere and then you're totally clueless about it. It's like you gotta put your toes in the water where you can here and there.
Got to stay up to date on it. Well, yeah, fantastic advice, and thank you to everybody who's been joining us here today. You know, who always tunes in. We love being here with all of you, and you know, and everybody who's sharing and liking the show and all of that. You know, that's we really appreciate it. And Winnie, thank you very much too for this newer time slot that works.
Thank you so much, Greg. And thank you so much, Ross. One challenge I'd like to share with all of you before you tune off here is, for those of you who are watching with us today, share with us how you envision using AI in your life, and make sure to tag myself and, of course, Greg Nibbler. We are on all the social media platforms, and our direct messages are open on Twitter as well. So if there's ways that you're using that you thought were fascinating, definitely share with us. We'll definitely, Ross, we're going to definitely have to have you back again, because this was such fascinating conversation. But with that, congratulations, Greg, again on the new show, and we appreciate you. But most huge applause for Greg, and hope you have a beautiful weekend, and sincere thank you so much, Ross. We so appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks everyone. Thank you, Winnie.
Bye.
Bye.